name is Sophia Chen, and for 29 years, I was the golden daughter who could do no wrong. Valedictorian of my high school class, summa cum laude from Northwestern, Harvard MBA at 25, and by 28, I was the youngest vice president in the history of Sterling and Associates, one of Chicago's most prestigious consulting firms. I was the daughter my parents, Henry and Margaret Chen, trotted out at every family gathering, every business dinner, every social event where they needed to prove their success as immigrants who had built the American dream from nothing. Their pride in me was so intense it was almost suffocating, but I basked in it anyway. I was their validation, their proof that sacrificing everything to come to America had been worth it. Sophia represents everything our family stands for, my father would say at dinner parties, his chest puffed with pride. Hard work, excellence, never accepting less than the best. My mother would nod approvingly, adding, "She's going to carry on our legacy, make sure the Chen name means something in this country." I had two younger siblings, my brother David, who was 26 and worked as a software engineer, and my sister Lisa, who was 24 and taught elementary school. They were successful in their own right, but they weren't me. They weren't the shining star that proved Henry and Margaret Chen had conquered America. The pressure was enormous, but I thrived under it. I worked 80-hour weeks, traveled constantly for client meetings, spoke at industry conferences, and dated only when it fit into my carefully planned schedule. My life was a perfectly choreographed performance of success, and my family was my most enthusiastic audience. Which is why planning my 30th birthday party felt so important. 30 felt like a milestone, a moment to celebrate not just my age, but everything I'd accomplished. More than that, I wanted to do something special for the family that had supported me through every achievement and every challenge. I started planning 2 months in advance, which might seem excessive for a birthday party, but everything I did was excessive. I rented the private dining room at Alinea, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants, for Saturday evening, March 15th. The cost was astronomical, nearly $8,000 just for the room and the tasting menu, but I could afford it, and I wanted my family to experience something truly special. I sent beautiful hand-calligraphed invitations to 20 people, my parents, my siblings, and their significant others, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles, and a few close family friends who had been part of my life since childhood. The invitation read, "Join me in celebrating 3 decades of life, love, and dreams coming true. Your presence would make this milestone perfect." I arranged transportation for my elderly grandparents, booked hotel rooms for the relatives who lived out of town, and even hired a photographer to capture what I knew would be a perfect evening. I wanted professional photos of my family celebrating together, something we could look back on for years to come. In the weeks leading up to the party, everyone seemed excited. My mother called me regularly to discuss what she should wear, asking if she should get her hair done specially for the occasion. My father joked about practicing his toast, since he'd been designated as the one to make the official birthday speech. David and Lisa helped me choose the wine pairings, and my grandmother insisted on making her famous red bean cake as a supplement to whatever dessert the restaurant was planning. "This is going to be such a beautiful celebration," my mother said during one of our planning calls. "The whole family together, honoring everything you've accomplished. I'm so proud to be your mother, Sophia." "We're going to make this a night you'll never forget," my father added, having picked up the extension. 30 years of watching you exceed every expectation we ever had. 3 days before the party, I confirmed everything one final time. The restaurant had all the dietary restrictions noted. The photographer knew when and where to arrive. The transportation service had the pickup times for my grandparents. I even bought a new dress, a stunning navy blue silk number that cost more than most people's monthly rent. but I wanted to look perfect for what I knew would be one of the most important nights of my life. The morning of March 15th, I woke up with the kind of excited energy I hadn't felt since Christmas morning as a child. I spent the day getting my hair and makeup done, picking up the custom cake my grandmother had made, and doing a final check on all the arrangements. Everything was perfect. I arrived at Alinea at 6 o'clock, an hour before the party was scheduled to start, wearing my new dress and carrying my grandmother's cake. The private dining room looked exactly as I'd envisioned, elegant, warm, with soft lighting that would be perfect for photographs. The staff had arranged the table beautifully, with 20 place settings and a special chair at the head for me. The photographer arrived right on schedule, and we spent a few minutes discussing the shots I wanted, candid moments of the family mingling, formal group photos, and definitely some pictures of my father giving his toast. I wanted to capture every moment of what I knew would be a perfect evening. At 7 o'clock, the first guests were supposed to arrive. I stood near the entrance to the private dining room, checking my phone and watching for familiar faces. 7:15. No one had arrived yet, but that wasn't unusual. My family ran on what we jokingly called chin time, which meant being fashionably late was practically a tradition. 7:30. I started to feel a flutter of concern, but I told myself they were probably all coming together, maybe stuck in traffic or waiting for my grandparents who moved slowly. 7:45. I called my mother. "Hey Mom, just checking on timing. The restaurant is ready whenever you guys are." The call went straight to voicemail. I tried my father, voicemail. David, voicemail. Lisa, voicemail. 8 o'clock. The restaurant staff was starting to look concerned. The photographer was sitting in the corner, probably wondering if he should leave. And I was standing alone in a room set for 20 people, wearing a dress that cost $3,000, holding a homemade cake, and feeling the first cold fingers of panic creeping up my spine. "Miss Chen," the maître approached me discreetly. "Would you like us to hold the table a bit longer, or—" "They're coming," I said, my voice sounding strange and far away. "They're just running late. Family, you know how it is." But I knew something was wrong. My family might run late, but they wouldn't ignore my calls. Not on my birthday. Not when they knew how important this was to me. 8:30. I had called everyone on the guest list multiple times. Every single call went to voicemail. It was as if my entire family had simultaneously turned off their phones and vanished from the face of the earth. The restaurant staff was being incredibly gracious, but I could see the pity in their eyes. The photographer had quietly packed up his equipment and left after I told him the party was postponed. And I was sitting alone at a table set for 20, with a birthday cake and no one to share it with. "Ms. Chen," the maitre said gently, "we can certainly accommodate you for dinner alone, or if you'd prefer to reschedule." "No," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'll eat alone." So I did. I sat at the head of that enormous table, with 19 empty chairs around me, and ate a 12-course tasting menu by myself while the staff pretended not to notice that I was fighting back tears. The food was exquisite, each dish a work of art that probably took hours to prepare, but it all tasted like ash in my mouth. The most humiliating part was the birthday acknowledgement the restaurant had planned. Halfway through the meal, the chef came out with a special dessert course, singing "Happy Birthday" with several staff members, clearly expecting to find a room full of celebrating family members. Instead, they found me sitting alone, trying to smile graciously while dying inside. "Thank you," I managed to say, blowing out the single candle on their beautiful creation. This is perfect." But it wasn't perfect. It was a disaster. It was the most humiliating experience of my adult life. I made it home around 11:30, carrying my grandmother's untouched cake and wearing a $3,000 dress that now felt like a costume for a play no one had bothered to attend. I sat in my apartment, staring at my phone, waiting for someone, anyone, to call and explain what had happened. No one called. I barely slept that night, running through every possible explanation. Had there been a family emergency I hadn't been told about? Had someone been in an accident? Had my grandfather had another heart episode? But if that were the case, surely someone would have called me, would have explained why they couldn't make it to my party. The more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't an accident or an emergency. This was deliberate. My entire family had made a collective decision to abandon me on my 30th birthday, and they hadn't even had the courtesy to tell me they weren't coming. Sunday morning, I finally got a text message from my mother. "Sorry we missed your party last night. Something came up. Hope you had a nice time." Something came up. 20 people, all of whom had confirmed their attendance, all of whom had seemed excited about the celebration, had something come up at exactly the same time. I called her immediately, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. "Mom, what the hell happened last night? Where was everyone?" "Sophia, I told you, something came up. It was unavoidable." "What came up? What was so important that you couldn't even call to tell me you weren't coming?" There was a pause, and when my mother spoke again, her voice was different, colder. "We decided as a family that we needed to send you a message." "What message?" "That you've become someone we don't recognize. Someone so focused on money and status and showing off that you've forgotten what really matters." I felt like I'd been slapped. "What are you talking about? I planned that party for you guys, for our family. I wanted to celebrate with the people I love most." "You planned that party to show off," my mother said. $8,000 for a dinner, Sophia. Do you know what $8,000 means to normal people? Do you know what your father and I could do with that money?" "I can afford it," I said, confusion mixing with my anger. I worked hard to be able to afford nice things, to be able to treat my family to nice experiences. "And that's exactly the problem," my mother continued. "You think money solves everything. You think expensive restaurants and fancy dresses make you better than everyone else. You've lost touch with your values, with what we taught you about humility and family. So you decided to humiliate me? You decided to let me sit alone at a table for 20 people to teach me a lesson about humility? We decided to show you what happens when you prioritize money over people," my mother said. "When you care more about impressing others than about being genuine with your family." The call ended with me screaming into the phone and my mother hanging up on me. I spent the rest of Sunday in my apartment, alternately crying and raging, trying to understand how the family that had always been so proud of my success had suddenly decided that success was a character flaw. Monday morning, I dragged myself to work, hoping that focusing on my job would help me process what had happened. But I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about sitting alone at Alinea, about the pity in the staff's eyes, about my mother's cold voice explaining that they deliberately abandoned me to teach me a lesson. That's when I made a decision that would change everything. If my family thought I cared too much about money, if they thought I was someone who prioritized wealth over relationships, then I would show them exactly how much money could accomplish when wielded with precision and purpose. I was going to teach them a lesson about what betrayal actually costs. Chapter 2: The Reckoning Begins. The first thing I did was take inventory of exactly how my family had benefited from my success over the years. I was meticulous about it, going through bank records, credit card statements, and receipts dating back 5 years. What I discovered was staggering. I had been the family's unofficial ATM for longer than I'd realized. My parents' mortgage payments, when my father's small business hit a rough patch, $47,000 over 8 months. David's graduate school tuition, when he decided to get his master's degree, $32,000. Lisa's wedding expenses when she married her high school sweetheart, $28,000. My grandmother's medical bills when she needed surgery, $15,000. Emergency car repairs, home improvements, vacation expenses, Christmas gifts that were far beyond what my siblings could afford. It all added up to more than $180,000 over 5 years. I had never kept track before because I loved helping my family. I made good money, they needed assistance, and it felt natural to share my success with the people who had supported me. But now, sitting in my apartment the week after my birthday disaster, those expenses looked different. They looked like investments that had been repaid with betrayal. I started making phone calls. "Hi, this is Sophia Chen calling about my parents' mortgage account," I told the representative at First National Bank. "I need to remove myself as a co-signer and guarantor on the loan." "Ms. Chen, I see here that you've been making the payments for the past several months. Are you sure you want to remove yourself from the account?" "Completely sure." I made similar calls to David's student loan servicer, where I'd been listed as a backup payer, and to the credit card company where I'd been covering Lisa's monthly minimums since her wedding expenses had gotten out of control. One by one, I removed myself from every financial obligation I'd taken on for my family members. Then I started calculating what my birthday party had actually cost me, including not just the restaurant but everything else I'd invested in trying to create a perfect celebration. The room and dinner, $8,200. The photographer, $1,500. Transportation for my grandparents, $400. Hotel rooms for out-of-town relatives, $1,200. My dress, shoes, and accessories, $3,800. The coordination time I'd taken off work, approximately $2,000 in billable hours. Total, $17,100. $17,000 to be humiliated and abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me most. But I wasn't done calculating. I added up the opportunity cost of every family obligation I'd prioritized over potential business opportunities. The client dinner I'd skipped to attend David's graduation. The conference I'd missed because Lisa needed help with her wedding planning. The networking events I'd declined because my parents expected me to be at family gatherings. My family had cost me far more than money. They'd cost me professional advancement, business relationships, and career opportunities. All so I could be the dutiful daughter who put family first, only to be abandoned when they decided my success was somehow a character flaw. That's when I decided to take a vacation. Not just any vacation, the most expensive, most luxurious, most absolutely indulgent vacation I could possibly arrange. And I was going to charge every penny of it to the family credit card I'd been using to pay their expenses for years. I called my travel agent, Sarah, who specialized in luxury travel for high net worth clients. "Sarah, I need you to plan me the most incredible solo trip you can imagine. Money is absolutely no object. I want first-class flights, 5-star hotels, Michelin-starred restaurants, private tours, the works. I want to spend 3 weeks living like royalty." "That sounds amazing, Sophia. What's the occasion?" "I'm celebrating my independence from people who don't appreciate me." Sarah understood immediately. She'd planned trips for enough high-powered clients to recognize the tone of someone who was done being taken for granted. "I have some ideas," she said. "How do you feel about a combination of Paris, Monaco, the Amalfi Coast, and maybe finishing in Tokyo?" "Perfect. Book it all. And Sarah, I want documentation of everything. Professional photos, receipts, proof of every luxury experience. This isn't just a vacation, it's a statement." Within 48 hours, Sarah had arranged an itinerary that read like a fantasy. First-class flights on Emirates with their private suites. The Ritz Paris for 5 nights, including their most expensive penthouse suite. A private yacht charter along the French Riviera. The Hotel Splendido in Portofino for 4 nights. Multiple reservations at restaurants with months-long waiting lists. Private shopping appointments at Chanel, Hermès, and Louis Vuitton. A finale in Tokyo at the Peninsula Hotel with exclusive cultural experiences that money typically couldn't buy. The total cost was $127,000 for 3 weeks. I used the family credit card for every single expense. The card was supposed to be for family emergencies and shared expenses, but I was listed as the primary account holder because I had the highest credit limit and the most stable income. Technically, I had every right to use it. Morally, I was about to spend more on a single vacation than most people made in 2 years, and I was going to make my family pay for it. Before I left for the trip, I sent a group text to everyone who had been invited to my birthday party. Hi everyone. Just wanted to let you know I'm taking some time to reflect on your message about money and priorities. I'll be traveling for the next 3 weeks, thinking about what really matters in life. Don't worry about me. I'm learning to prioritize my own happiness over other people's expectations. Talk soon, red heart emoji. I didn't tell them where I was going or how much I was spending. I wanted it to be a surprise. The trip began with the Emirates first-class flight from Chicago to Paris. I had my own private suite with a bed, a shower, a personal minibar, and a dedicated flight attendant. As the plane took off, I sipped champagne that cost more per bottle than most people spent on groceries in a week, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete freedom from other people's expectations. I documented everything. Photos of my first-class suite, videos of the 7-course meal served on fine china, pictures of the luxury amenities. Not for social media, I wasn't ready to go public with my rebellion yet, but for my own records. I wanted proof of every dollar I was spending, every luxury I was experiencing, every moment of the trip my family was unknowingly paying for. Paris was a revelation. The Ritz penthouse suite was larger than most people's apartments, with views of the Place Vendôme and enough space to host a small party. I had breakfast in bed every morning, spent afternoons at private shopping appointments where salespeople treated me like royalty, and dined at restaurants where reservations were typically impossible to get. At Lambercy, I had lunch alone at a table that probably cost more per meal than my parents spent on food in a month. The sommelier recommended a wine that cost €800 per bottle, and I ordered 2 bottles just because I could. I sat there eating perfection and thinking about my family's lecture about priorities and values. Your finest champagne, I told the waiter at dinner that night at Le Meurice, another 3 Michelin-starred restaurant. And keep it coming. I spent €3,000 on dinner for one person. The credit card went through without any problems. From Paris, I flew first class to Nice and boarded the private yacht I'd chartered for 4 days along the French Riviera. The yacht came with a full crew, a private chef who had trained under Gordon Ramsay, and enough luxury amenities to make a billionaire comfortable. I had lunch in Monaco, gambling a casual €5,000 at the Casino de Monte Carlo, just because I'd never been to Monaco without trying the famous casino. I won €8,000, which I immediately spent on a handbag at the Hermès boutique that I didn't particularly need but wanted as a symbol of my newfound independence. Every evening, I sat on the yacht's deck with a glass of champagne that cost more than most people's hourly wage, watching the Mediterranean sunset and thinking about my birthday party. About sitting alone at that table for 20, about the humiliation, about my mother's cold voice explaining that they'd abandoned me to teach me a lesson. Well, I said aloud to the sunset, raising my glass in a toast to myself. Lesson learned. The Amalfi Coast was breathtaking. The Hotel Splendido in Portofino was everything I'd hoped, perched on a cliff overlooking the Italian Riviera, with service so attentive that I never had to ask for anything twice. I had spa treatments that cost more than most people's car payments, dined on terraces with views that belonged in travel magazines, and shopped in boutiques where the salespeople remembered my preferences after a single visit. I was living like the wealthiest version of myself, and I was documenting every moment of it. But the real masterpiece was Tokyo. The Peninsula Hotel's Imperial Suite was a work of art, traditional Japanese aesthetics combined with modern luxury, views of the Imperial Palace gardens, and service that anticipated my needs before I knew I had them. I arranged private sushi experiences with master chefs, exclusive cultural tours that weren't available to regular tourists, and shopping expeditions to districts that most visitors never saw. I bought a kimono that cost more than most people's monthly rent, had my fortune told by a renowned spiritual advisor, and attended a private tea ceremony that had a 6-month waiting list. Throughout the entire trip, I kept meticulous records. Every receipt, every photo, every experience was documented and organized. I was building a case, collecting evidence for the conversation I was going to have with my family when I returned. On my final night in Tokyo, as I sat in my imperial suite sipping sake that was older than I was, and looking out at the city lights, I composed an email to my family. I didn't send it, not yet, but I wrote it out, crafting every word carefully. Dear family, thank you for the birthday lesson about priorities and values. You were absolutely right. I had lost touch with what really matters. So I took some time to reflect on your message, and I've learned so much about myself and about money's true value. I've attached some photos from my educational journey. As you can see, I've been learning about luxury, about treating myself with the respect that others sometimes fail to show, and about the importance of surrounding myself with people who appreciate rather than judge my success. This trip cost $127,000, which I charged to our family credit card. I know that seems like a lot, but as you taught me, money isn't everything. It's just a tool for teaching important lessons about respect, loyalty, and the consequences of betrayal. I hope you've enjoyed paying for my education as much as I've enjoyed receiving it. With love and gratitude for the lesson, Sophia. P.S. The credit card statement should arrive next week. I can't wait to hear your thoughts on my new understanding of priorities. I saved the email in my drafts folder and went to bed in my $5,000 per night hotel suite, sleeping better than I had in months. The real fun was going to begin when I got home. Chapter 3. The Bill Comes Due. I returned to Chicago on a Tuesday morning, tanned, relaxed, and carrying approximately $30,000 worth of luxury goods from my 3-week educational tour. My apartment felt small after the hotel suites I'd been living in, but it also felt like a sanctuary where I could prepare for the conversation I knew was coming. The credit card statement would arrive within the week. When it did, my family was going to see exactly what their birthday lesson had cost them. I spent my first day back organizing all the documentation from my trip. Photos, receipts, itineraries, videos, everything arranged chronologically to tell the story of 3 weeks living without limits. I created a detailed expense report, breaking down every cost category: flights, hotels, dining, shopping, experiences, and miscellaneous luxury items. Transportation, $23,400, first-class flights and private transfers. Accommodation, $42,000, penthouse suites and luxury hotels. Dining, $18,500, Michelin-starred restaurants and premium alcohol. Shopping, $31,200, designer clothing, jewelry, and accessories. Experiences, $11,900, private tours, yacht charter, exclusive access. Total, $127,000 for 21 days of absolute luxury. I also calculated the daily cost breakdown, which came to just over $6,000 per day. More than most people's monthly salary, spent every single day for 3 weeks straight. But the numbers were just the beginning. I wanted my family to understand exactly what they had paid for, so I wrote detailed descriptions of each experience. Not just had dinner at Le Bernardin, but enjoyed a 7-course tasting menu with wine pairings selected by the sommelier, featuring rare ingredients flown in from around the world. Served in a private dining room overlooking Central Park. I wanted them to visualize every luxury, every indulgence, every moment of the life their money had purchased for me. 3 days after I returned, my phone started ringing. It was my father, and he sounded like he was having trouble breathing. "Sophia, we need to talk, right now." "Hi, Dad, how are you? I just got back from the most incredible trip. Did you get my postcards?" "The credit card statement, Sophia. What the hell did you do?" "Oh, that. I took your advice about priorities and went on a little educational journey. I learned so much about myself and about what really matters in life." "You spent $127,000 in 3 weeks." "I know. Can you believe how much I learned?" Every dollar was worth it for the education I received. There was silence on the other end of the line, the kind of silence that comes from complete shock. "Sophia, that money. We don't have that kind of money. The credit card payment is due next week, and we can't cover it." "That's strange," I said, keeping my voice perfectly innocent. "I thought money didn't matter. I thought you wanted to teach me that I was too focused on wealth and material things." "This is different," my father said, and I could hear the panic in his voice. "This is our house, our savings, our retirement. This debt could destroy us financially." "Well, I'm sure something will come up," I said, echoing my mother's dismissive response about my birthday party. "These things usually work themselves out." My father was quiet for a long moment. "What do you want, Sophia?" "What do I want?" I repeated, as if I'd never considered the question. "I want my family to understand that actions have consequences. I want them to know what it feels like to be abandoned and betrayed by the people they trust most. And I want them to experience the cost of their choices in very concrete terms." "We can't pay this," he said quietly. "Then you should have thought about that before you decided to teach me a lesson by humiliating me on my 30th birthday." I hung up on him, just like my mother had hung up on me. Within an hour, my phone was buzzing with calls and texts from every family member. David, Lisa, my mother, even my grandmother. Everyone wanted to know what I was thinking, how I could be so irresponsible, how I could put the family in financial jeopardy over a birthday party. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I sent a group text. "I'm happy to discuss this situation, but only if we can all meet in person. I have some things to show you that will help explain my educational journey. How about Saturday at 2 p.m.? I'll come to Mom and Dad's house. We can have a family meeting about priorities and values." Saturday came, and I arrived at my parents' house carrying a large presentation portfolio and wearing one of the outfits I'd bought in Paris, a Chanel suit that had cost more than my father's car payment. The entire family was there, sitting around the living room like they were attending a funeral. Which, in a way, they were, the funeral of our old family dynamic. "Thank you all for coming," I said, setting up my presentation materials on the coffee table. "I know this is difficult, but I think it's important that we discuss what happened and what we've all learned from it." "Sophia," my mother began, "we need to talk about this credit card debt. We need to figure out how to handle this situation." "Of course," I said, But first, I want to share what I learned from your birthday lesson. I documented everything so you could see exactly how your educational program worked. I opened my portfolio and began displaying photos from the trip. The first-class flight suite, the Ritz penthouse, the private yacht, the Michelin-star dinners, the designer shopping sprees, the exclusive experiences that money could buy. This is what $127,000 looks like when it's spent on priorities and values, I said, arranging the photos so everyone could see them. Every meal was a celebration of life. Every hotel was a testament to the importance of treating yourself well. Every shopping trip was an investment in self-respect. David stared at a photo of me in the Monaco casino, holding a glass of champagne that probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget. Sophia, this is insane. You can't possibly think this was appropriate. Why not? I asked. You all decided that money was corrupting me, that I needed to learn about what really mattered. So I learned. I learned that what really matters is surrounding yourself with people who appreciate you, experiences that bring you joy, and environments where you're treated with respect. I pulled out the detailed expense report I'd prepared. Let me break this down for you. Transportation costs averaged about $1,100 per day, but that included private jets and first-class suites with beds and showers. Accommodation averaged $2,000 per night, but that was for penthouse suites with views that you can't put a price on. Dining cost about $880 per day, but that was for meals prepared by the world's best chefs using ingredients that most people will never taste. Lisa was crying. Sophia, how could you do this to us? How could you put the family in debt just because you were mad about a birthday party? A birthday party, I repeated, my voice rising. Lisa, you think this is about a birthday party? This is about 20 people who claim to love me deciding collectively to abandon me on one of the most important days of my life. This is about my mother telling me it was a deliberate lesson to teach me about humility. I pulled out more photos, pictures of me dining alone in beautiful restaurants, shopping in boutiques where the staff treated me like royalty, experiencing culture and luxury that most people only see in movies. You wanted to teach me that money doesn't buy happiness, I continued. So I tested that theory extensively. And you know what I learned? Money doesn't buy happiness, but it does buy respect, comfort, beauty, and experiences that create joy. It also buys the power to teach lessons about consequences. My grandmother spoke up, her voice shaking with age and anger. Sophia, we raised you better than this. This is not who you are. You're right, I said. The person you raised would have accepted your cruelty quietly, would have apologized for being successful, would have continued to support everyone financially while being treated like a disappointment. But that person died at Alinea 3 weeks ago, sitting alone at a table for 20, eating a birthday dinner that no one cared enough to attend. I pulled out the final piece of my presentation, a detailed accounting of everything I paid for over the past 5 years. Every mortgage payment, every tuition bill, every emergency expense, every family celebration I'd funded. This is what the old Sophia cost herself, I said, spreading the documents across the coffee table. $180,000 in 5 years. And in return for that investment, she got abandonment, humiliation, and a lecture about how her success was somehow a character flaw. The room was completely silent. My parents stared at the accounting records, probably seeing the full scope of my financial support for the first time. So I decided to invest that money differently, I continued. Instead of spending it on people who would betray me, I spent it on myself. Instead of funding other people's dreams, I funded my own experiences. Instead of prioritizing family over everything else, I prioritized my own happiness. My father looked up from the records. What do you want from us, Sophia? What will it take to fix this? I want an apology, I said simply. I want acknowledgement that what you did to me was cruel and wrong. I want recognition that abandoning someone on their birthday to teach them a lesson about humility is actually a lesson about cruelty. And if we apologize? My mother asked. What happens to the debt? I smiled, pulling out one final document from my portfolio. If you apologize sincerely, if you acknowledge what you did and why it was wrong, then I'll take care of the credit card debt. I can afford it, remember. I'm the one who's too focused on money. And if we don't? David asked. Then you'll figure out how to pay for the education you insisted I needed, I said. You'll learn about the financial cost of emotional cruelty. You'll discover what it's like to have your financial security threatened by someone you trusted. I started packing up my presentation materials. You have 24 hours to decide. Either you apologize for what you did and acknowledge that it was wrong, or you figure out how to come up with $127,000 to pay for the lesson you insisted on teaching me. Sophia, wait, my mother called as I headed for the door. We can't possibly pay that amount. It would bankrupt us. I turned back to face her. Then you should have thought about that before you decided to bankrupt me emotionally. Actions have consequences, Mom. I learned that from you. Chapter 4: The Price of Truth. That night, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine that had cost more than most people's dinner budget, waiting for my family to decide whether their pride was worth $127,000. I wasn't bluffing about being able to cover the debt. My savings account could handle it without seriously impacting my lifestyle. But that wasn't the point anymore. The point was whether my family would choose to acknowledge their cruelty or double down on their self-righteousness. My phone rang at 11:47 p.m. It was my mother. Sophia, we need to talk about this reasonably. What you're asking for. It's not that simple. It's incredibly simple, I said. Apologize for deliberately humiliating me, or pay the price for the lesson you insisted on teaching. We weren't trying to humiliate you, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. We were trying to help you see that you'd lost perspective. By abandoning me on my birthday? By letting me sit alone at a table for 20 people while you all ignored my calls? We thought it would make you realize that relationships matter more than expensive restaurants. And did it work? I asked. Did abandoning me teach me that relationships matter? Because what I learned is that my relationships with all of you were conditional on my acceptance of whatever treatment you decided to dish out. There was a long pause. What if we compromise? What if we pay half the debt and you cover the other half? No, I said simply. There's no compromise here. You made a choice to teach me a lesson through cruelty. Either you acknowledge that what you did was wrong, or you pay the full cost of your educational program. Sophia, please be reasonable. I was reasonable for 29 years, I interrupted. I was reasonable when I paid your mortgage. I was reasonable when I covered David's tuition. I was reasonable when I funded Lisa's wedding. I was reasonable when I sacrificed my own time and opportunities to be the perfect daughter who put family first. And where did being reasonable get me? Abandoned at my own birthday party. I hung up and turned off my phone. I was done negotiating. The next morning, I went to work as usual, but I couldn't concentrate. Every few minutes, I found myself checking my phone to see if anyone had called. By lunchtime, I had 17 missed calls and 43 text messages from various family members, all pleading with me to be reasonable, to understand their financial situation, to remember that family comes first. The irony wasn't lost on me. Now that they needed something from me, suddenly family was supposed to come first. At 3 p.m., my assistant buzzed me. Ms. Chen, your entire family is here to see you. They say it's urgent. I looked out my office window and saw them in the lobby, my parents, David, Lisa, even my grandmother, all sitting in the modern steel and glass waiting area looking completely out of place among the corporate executives and business consultants. Send them up to conference room B, I told my assistant. I'll be there in 5 minutes. I took those 5 minutes to prepare myself emotionally. I had spent my entire career learning how to negotiate from a position of strength, how to remain calm under pressure, how to make difficult decisions without letting emotion cloud my judgment. All of those skills were about to be tested by the people who knew exactly which emotional buttons to push. When I entered the conference room, they were sitting around the polished mahogany table looking like defendants waiting for a verdict. My grandmother was crying softly. Lisa looked like she hadn't slept. David kept checking his phone nervously. My parents sat stiffly, their faces masks of controlled desperation. Thank you all for coming to my office, I said, taking the seat at the head of the table, the power position I'd learned to claim in business negotiations. I assume you've made a decision about how to handle our situation. Sophia, my father began, we've talked about this as a family, and we want you to know that we never intended to hurt you the way we apparently did. Apparently? I repeated. Are you saying you're not sure whether abandoning me at my birthday party was hurtful? We believed we were helping you, my mother said. We were worried that you were becoming someone we didn't recognize, someone who valued money more than family. So you decided to prove how much family mattered by showing me that I couldn't count on any of you when I needed you most? My grandmother reached across the table, trying to take my hand. Sweetheart, we love you. We've always loved you. We just wanted. You wanted to control me, I said, pulling my hand away. You wanted to punish me for being successful, for having the audacity to spend my own money on things you disapproved of. You wanted to remind me that no matter how much I achieved, you could still bring me down whenever you felt like it. That's not true, David said. We were genuinely concerned about you. You seemed so focused on work and money and status that we were worried you were losing sight of what really matters. What really matters? I repeated slowly. Tell me, David, when you couldn't make your student loan payments last year, what really mattered then? When I covered 3 months of your rent so you could keep your apartment, was money meaningless then too? David looked down at the table, unable to meet my eyes. I turned to Lisa. And when you needed $28,000 for your wedding because you and Mark wanted a celebration you couldn't afford, did money matter then? When I paid for your dress, your flowers, your photographer, your reception, was I being shallow and materialistic? Lisa started crying harder. We're grateful for everything you've done for us, Sophia. We never said we weren't grateful. Grateful? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You showed your gratitude by abandoning me on my birthday and then lecturing me about how my success was corrupting me. That's a very interesting way to express gratitude. My mother leaned forward, desperation clear in her voice. Sophia, we're sorry. We're truly sorry. We made a mistake, and we hurt you badly. We understand that now. Do you? I asked. Because this sounds like you're sorry about the credit card bill, not sorry about what you did to me. We're sorry about both, my father said quickly. We're sorry we hurt you, and we're sorry about the financial situation. We need your help to fix this. I sat back in my chair, studying their faces. These were the people who had raised me, who had celebrated my achievements, who had benefited from my success for years. They were also the people who had collectively decided to betray me when they felt I needed to be brought down a peg. Here's what's going to happen, I said finally. I'm going to pay the credit card debt because I can afford it, and because I don't want to destroy your financial stability the way you destroyed my emotional stability. The relief that washed over their faces was visible. But, I continued, and their expressions immediately tensed again. Our relationship is going to change permanently. I'm not going to be the family ATM anymore. I'm not going to sacrifice my time and opportunities to be available whenever you need something. And I'm not going to pretend that what you did to me was acceptable just because you've apologized. What does that mean? My mother asked quietly. It means I'm done being the daughter who puts family first when family clearly doesn't put me first. It means I'm going to prioritize my own happiness and well-being over everyone else's expectations. It means you taught me exactly the lesson you intended, that money and success are more reliable than family loyalty. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Right there at the conference table, with my family watching, I transferred $127,000 from my savings account to the family credit card. There, I said, showing them the confirmation screen. Your debt is paid. Your lesson has been purchased in full. Sophia, my grandmother said softly, what can we do to fix this? What can we do to have our granddaughter back? I looked at her, this woman who had helped raise me, who had made me red bean cakes for every birthday until this year, who had taught me Mandarin and told me stories about our family's history in China. You can't, I said simply. The granddaughter who would have forgiven this, who would have made excuses for your behavior, who would have continued to put family above everything else, she died at Alinea 3 weeks ago. The person sitting here now is someone who learned that she can't trust the people who claim to love her most. I stood up, straightening my designer suit, the same one I'd bought in Paris with money they'd unwittingly paid for. The debt is cleared, so we're even financially, I said. But emotionally, personally, we're not even close to even. You wanted to teach me a lesson about priorities? Congratulations. I learned that my priority should be protecting myself from people who think cruelty is an acceptable teaching method. As I walked toward the conference room door, my mother called after me. Sophia, please. We're family. Family forgives. I turned back to look at them one final time. You're right. Family should forgive. Family should also show up when it matters. Family should celebrate each other's successes instead of punishing them. Family should be honest about their concerns instead of expressing them through abandonment and humiliation. I paused, my hand on the door handle. But most importantly, family should understand that forgiveness has to be earned, not demanded. And spending 3 weeks in luxury hotels on your dime was just the down payment on what you owe me. I left them sitting in that conference room and went back to my office. Through my window, I watched them leave the building 20 minutes later, walking slowly like people who had just realized they'd lost something they could never get back. That evening, I opened a bottle of champagne, not the $1,000 bottles I'd been drinking in Europe, just a nice bottle from my local wine shop. I sat on my balcony overlooking the Chicago skyline, watching the city lights twinkle below, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace with my own decisions. My phone buzzed with text messages throughout the evening. David thanking me for paying the debt. Lisa apologizing again and begging me to forgive them. My mother asking if we could have lunch sometime to talk. My father wondering if I'd consider coming to Sunday dinner next week. I didn't respond to any of them. Not because I was still angry, though I was, but because I was busy planning my future without them at the center of it. 3 months later, I was promoted to Senior Vice President at Sterling & Associates, the youngest person in the company's history to reach that level. The promotion came with a substantial salary increase, stock options, and the kind of prestige that opened doors throughout the industry. I celebrated by taking myself to dinner at Alinea, the same restaurant where I'd spent my birthday alone. But this time, I sat at a table for one by choice, not by abandonment. This time, I ordered their most expensive tasting menu and their finest wine pairings because I wanted to, not because I was trying to impress anyone else. The maitre d' recognized me from my birthday disaster. Ms. Chen, How lovely to see you again, he said warmly. Are you expecting other guests this evening? No, I said, settling into my chair with a smile. Tonight it's just me, exactly the way I want it. As I sat there eating food that was truly art, drinking wine that was liquid poetry, and enjoying the kind of solitude that money could buy, I reflected on everything that had happened since my 30th birthday. My family had taught me a lesson, but not the one they intended. They had wanted to show me that money couldn't buy happiness or replace genuine relationships. What they actually taught me was that genuine relationships were rarer than I believed, that the people who claimed to love me most were capable of tremendous cruelty, and that sometimes the best thing you can do for yourself is stop investing in people who don't value your investment. The $127,000 I'd spent on that trip wasn't just money. It was the price of my independence. It was the cost of learning who I really was when I stopped trying to be who everyone else wanted me to be. It was an investment in understanding that my worth wasn't determined by other people's approval or disapproval. 6 months after the conference room confrontation, I started receiving invitations again. Family gatherings, holiday celebrations, birthdays, they all wanted me back now that they understood I was serious about boundaries. I declined most of them politely but firmly. The few I attended were on my terms, with clear understanding that I was there as a guest, not as the family bank or the daughter who would sacrifice anything for the sake of family harmony. My relationship with each family member evolved differently. My grandmother, who had always been the kindest to me, gradually earned back some of my trust through consistent effort and genuine remorse. Lisa made slow progress by actually changing her behavior instead of just apologizing for it. David remained distant, perhaps because his pride was hurt by how much he'd needed my financial support. My parents struggled the most with the new dynamic. They had raised me to be the perfect daughter who would always prioritize family, and they couldn't understand how to relate to the woman I'd become, someone who prioritized herself first and offered family what was left over. A year after my birthday disaster, my mother called me with news that my father had been diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer. The treatment would be expensive, she said. Insurance would cover most of it, but there would still be significant out-of-pocket costs. I'm not asking you to pay for it, she said carefully. I just wanted you to know what was happening. Thank you for telling me, I said. I'll send flowers to the hospital and visit when I can. There was a pause. Sophia, if we needed help, if the medical bills became overwhelming, then you'd figure it out, I said gently but firmly. The same way families all over the world figure out medical expenses. You'd research payment plans, look into financial assistance programs, maybe ask friends for help. You'd handle it like adults who are responsible for their own lives. But you're family, she said, and I could hear tears in her voice. Yes, I agreed. I'm family, and family cares about each other. That's why I'll visit Dad in the hospital, bring him books to read during recovery, and make sure he knows I love him. But I'm not the family insurance policy anymore. I'm just family. She hung up without saying goodbye, probably hoping that guilt would change my mind. It didn't. My father's treatment was successful, and they managed the expenses through a combination of payment plans and help from Lisa and David, a reminder that there were other people in the family capable of stepping up when needed. 2 years after my 30th birthday, I received an invitation to my cousin Jennifer's wedding. Jennifer was my aunt's daughter, someone I'd always been close to, but who had stayed neutral during the family drama. The invitation was addressed to Ms. Sophia Chen, with no +1 indicated. I respected yes, and bought Jennifer a generous but not extravagant wedding gift. At the reception, I found myself seated at a table with extended family members, people who knew about the birthday situation but hadn't been directly involved. During dinner, my Aunt Patricia leaned over to me. Sophia, I've been wanting to tell you something, she said quietly. What your parents did to you on your birthday. That was wrong. I told them so at the time, but they wouldn't listen. They were so convinced they were teaching you an important lesson. Thank you for saying that, I said. It means a lot to hear. I also wanted you to know that what you did afterwards, the trip, the credit card, making them pay for their lesson. I thought it was brilliant. I looked at her in surprise. Really? Really? They needed to understand that actions have consequences, and they needed to learn it in a language they'd understand, money. You taught them something they never would have learned through words alone. As the evening progressed, I realized that my extended family's opinion was mixed, but not uniformly critical. Some thought I'd been too harsh. Others thought my parents had gotten exactly what they deserved. Most seemed to understand that the situation was more complicated than either side was willing to admit. During the father-daughter dance, I watched Jennifer twirl around the dance floor with her father, both of them laughing and clearly enjoying the moment. For a brief second, I felt a pang of sadness, not for my relationship with my parents, but for the relationship we might have had if they had chosen to support my success instead of punish it. But the sadness passed quickly. I had learned something invaluable from the whole experience, that you can't make people treat you well by treating them well. You can't earn respect by accepting disrespect. And you can't build healthy relationships with people who think love gives them the right to be cruel. As I drove home from the wedding that night, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The fury that had sustained me through that $127,000 trip, through the confrontation in the conference room, through the difficult months of establishing new boundaries, all of that had transformed into something else. Peace, self-respect, the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you can rely on yourself when everyone else lets you down. My 30th birthday had been the worst night of my adult life. But it had also been the beginning of the best version of myself, the version that didn't need anyone else's approval to know her own worth, that didn't sacrifice her own happiness for other people's comfort, that understood the difference between being generous and being a doormat. 3 years later, I'm 33, still single by choice, still successful, still putting myself first. I have friends who appreciate me, colleagues who respect me, and a family that has learned to accept the boundaries I've established. I travel frequently, always first class, always to places that bring me joy. I eat at restaurants that make me happy, buy things that please me, and live exactly the life I want to live. My parents and I have a polite but distant relationship now. We exchange holiday cards and birthday wishes. I attend major family events when I choose to. They've stopped lecturing me about priorities and values, perhaps because they learned the cost of such lectures. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if they had just shown up to my birthday party. If they had come, eaten the expensive meal, celebrated with me, and then privately expressed their concerns about my lifestyle in a respectful conversation later. But then I realized that if they had done that, I never would have learned who I really was when stripped of their approval. I never would have discovered my own strength, my own capacity for self-advocacy, my own ability to create happiness without depending on other people's validation. The woman who sat alone at Alinea on her 30th birthday was broken, humiliated, and desperate for her family's acceptance. The woman writing this story is whole, confident, and entirely comfortable with her own company. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes the people who abandon you do you the greatest favor of all. They force you to discover that you never needed them as much as you thought you did. And sometimes, when people decide to teach you a lesson through cruelty, the most powerful response is to learn a completely different lesson than the one they intended to teach. My family wanted me to learn that money couldn't buy happiness. What I actually learned was that money could buy freedom. Freedom from people who didn't appreciate me. Freedom from relationships built on guilt and obligation. Freedom to create the life I actually wanted instead of the life others expected me to live. It was the most expensive education I ever received, and it was worth every penny, especially